Hello, this is Dr. Feast Price. For the first 4 weeks of this course, Group and Family Therapy, we focused our attention on group therapy, and in so doing, we came to better understand the theories and techniques of group work. We identified the stages of group therapy as well as the role and function of group leaders or facilitators and ethical issues or implications associated with the work that we perform. This is the part of our class where we shift our attention from group therapy and focus on family therapy. And as we begin to better understand family therapy, I'd like for us to consider what families are. So we want to better understand families, and we also want to understand the rationale as well as the history of family therapy or family counseling. And by understanding this information, it helps to best prepare you for your role that lies ahead as a therapist should you work as a clinician with families, or regardless the setting, should you interact with families, it helps you to understand the family context and issues that might arise within the family that might pose an impediment to persons with disabilities as they try to reach their maximum potential. So the class objectives are to understand individual and family life cycles, to delineate healthy and dysfunctional families, and explore the rationale for and history of family therapy. So the first question one might pose as they explore family therapy is, what exactly is a family? And we know that there are many definitions of what a family is. And in today's time, more than ever before, we are redefining what families are, particularly when there are more equal rights that are afforded to people that have not been afforded in the past. So in the traditional sense, we know that families are the first societies that exist in any person's life. When a person is born, we know that the first persons that they interact with are their parents or the family unit. And it's our first exposure to the world of social relationships as well as rules associated with communicating and getting along with others. Families produce as well as socialize children. And when we say produce, there are various ways of producing a family. So whether it be through means of adoption or through natural birth processes, a family brings together or produce children, and they also socialize children. They act as a unit of economic cooperation whereby the parents work, bring in the money. Sometimes children within the family also work to contribute to the family as a means of sustaining other persons within the family or each other in the family. So it's an economic cooperation that exists within a unit. It also gives significant roles for children, the husband, the wife, the parents. So there are specific roles and responsibilities and expectations that are most often recognized within the family unit or the family context. It provides a source of intimacy and deepest and most satisfactory emotional experiences of life, which includes, but is not complete, love, devotion, attachment, belonging, fun, and joy. Additional kinds of issues that comprise a family, and as communicated by Adler, is that individuals are best understood in the context of their relationships. And so when you want to understand an individual, not only must you see that person, but you have to understand their family context or family affiliation or constellation to best understand who that individual is. Because as per Adler, we are a product of our relationships, and most often it's a product of our family relationships, since that is, in fact, our first relationship or the first social interactions that we have in society. Some of individuals' problems are developed in the context of the family system, and as such, they might be passed along from one generation to another. A person may develop the problem outside of the family, but the problem might impact negatively on the family unit. So we recognize that the problems in which individuals might possess might be as a result of the family, as well as issues that might occur outside of the family and thus impact the family unit. As a therapist, oftentimes when I work with families or couples, it's not so much the presenting issues aren't usually issues within the family. It's oftentimes things that have occurred outside of the family, whether it be infidelity or other kinds of substance abuse or use issues that then impact the family unit. And so it's important when you work as a family therapist that you recognize that we are social beings, and as Adler espouses, many of our issues or concerns that exist within our lives or as a result of our relationships, and those relationships may be specific to issues within the family of origin that has been passed along from generation to generation, or it may be problems that may have developed outside of the family. However, it is posing a negative impact on the family unit. Along the same lines, the family can affect the way the individual experiences the problem that they may encounter, as well as how they express it. Some individuals grow up learning that it's not socially acceptable to show emotions, or to the contrary, there may be individuals that are so used to getting attention, it's difficult for them to function because the world caters to them. And so we recognize that the family can affect the individual experiences, and as it relates to how they encounter problems and how they handle problems and express themselves when they're confronted with a problem. So it's learned behavior is what is being communicated here. Individuals learn how to relate to difficult experiences or problems based upon what they have been taught in their social development, and most often it's from their families. So whenever I work with clients that present with certain kinds of issues, or they believe that I'm a wimp because I'm crying, or I'm not a man because I can't make a certain amount of money and provide for my family, those kinds of messages come from somewhere. And as a clinician, I always try and understand, where did you receive those messages from? And once you understand where the messages have come from, you try and help the individual to recognize that there are deviations from the messages that they were taught, that's only one way of understanding or coming to a rationalization of their functioning, but there are other ways of identifying a phenomenon. But oftentimes it's going back to that family function or the family as a system to help understand how an individual experiences problems or express emotions. Each family has a culture and an identity that serves a value to that family unit. And so, yes, there are extrinsic or external cultural factors that exist. Sometimes it might be socioeconomic, sometimes it may be geographic, but within every family is a culture, and every culture is unique to that particular family. Individuals gain an understanding of their level of competence in the world, as well as self-efficacy. So if an individual has a low level of competence in the world, they don't feel a certain level of confidence interacting with the world, problem solving, navigating, oftentimes they are the ones that you might see in therapy. Persons that have a high competence, a high level of competence within the world, they have a certain level of self-efficacy, they're more likely to be able to navigate their problems and overcome barriers or issues. Within every family, there are times when problems occur that may diminish one's level of competence. So, for example, if a husband and wife are getting along well, and all of a sudden they're confronted with a traumatic experience, they may have been at a high level of competence prior to this unusual phenomenon, but then if there is an issue related to trauma or the birth of a child with a disability, and there is a low level of competence in handling that situation, then most often persons are in need of additional support services. And they're always fortunate when they recognize the need for therapeutic assistance to overcome their barriers. There are different types of families, and we recognize, as I said before, that families have evolved over the last 50 years. There are different kinds of families that are recognized and celebrated in comparison to years before. So the most prevalent forms of family are the nuclear family, where there's the two parents and the children. There are single parent families where most often in some families it's the mother that's the single parent, head of the household, along with the children. There are also instances where it might be the father who's the primary parent, the single parent, with the children within that family constellation. You have remarried families where there are blended families, where there is a stepmother, stepfather, but these are families where the husband and wife remarry, and they have blended families with stepchildren, and they include remarried families. Other family forms include dual career families, whereby both the husband and the wife work, and so research has shown that with dual career families, there are certain issues that are unique to dual career families. There are child-free families, couples that may have made the decision that they will not have children, or for whatever reason there are no children present in the family, so there are child-free families. There are gay and lesbian families, aging families, multi-generational families, grandparent-headed families, which is something that has been far more prevalent, especially in the African American family, as certain epidemics have plagued our communities. We're seeing far more grandparent-headed families. And we also recognize military families, particularly with the current war that we have going on and so many people having to leave for the tours of duty, and realizing that even though the family is considered an intact family, whenever a loved one has to go away for an extended period of time, it does have implications for the family. So there are specific characteristics that exist within a healthy family. I believe that all families are in a process of becoming. Families are not stagnant. And so families that are believed to be most healthy and most well-functioning have certain key components, and included are commitment, when each of the persons within the family has a commitment to each other. There's an appreciation for each other in the family, a willingness to spend time together. There are effective communication patterns. Religious or spiritual orientations are recognized to be very important in healthy families. They deal with crises in a positive way. They turn to each other rather than turning to persons or vices outside of the marriage. Persons within a healthy family encourage each other within the family. There are clear roles and responsibilities that are delineated, which means that the adults in the family function as adults, and they allow the children to function as children. There are growth-producing structures and development. So growth-producing structure is if there are children within the family, you give them opportunities to grow and develop their intellectual and behavioral kinds of skills within the family. So as well for the husband and the wife, when there are opportunities where they can grow and develop without one party feeling like, I don't want you to grow, I want you to stay the same, but the other person has the ability to grow and function and to become more self-actualized. So these are characteristics of a healthy family. I know not only from my own personal experience, but that of a clinician, we are all in the process of becoming, and we have to actively work to maintain the characteristics of a healthy family. There are so many things that are going on in society today that compromises the extent to which our families are healthy. You know, there are internets and chat rooms and, you know, just the web, the World Wide Web has changed the impact in the ways in which it may compromise a family, but we recognize that families that have these core characteristics, that are actively working to maintain these characteristics, are those that are most happiest. There are also specific coping strategies of families, and it helps these families to be successful and to function effectively. And for starters, there is an ability to identify the stressor. We know that in any given family, stressors occur, whether it be an accident that happened that was unplanned, whether it's the birth of a child after many years of trying, you give birth to a child and the child is born with a disability, and as a result, the marriage is stressed in ways that it hasn't been stressed before. And the reason I draw this particular example is because research shows that families that give birth to a child with a disability can have myriad implications for the marriage, and oftentimes these marriages end in divorce. And so in order for families to remain healthy, they have to have an effective coping mechanism or effective coping strategies, and among those are an ability to identify the stressor. So what's the problem? What is the problem or the stressor that's impacting our marriage? There must also be the ability to view the situation as a family problem rather than an individual problem. Oftentimes when I work with families, there's a tendency for a husband and wife to perceive the one person as the problem, or she has a problem, or his problem is. But in a family unit, it's no his problem or her problem, it is a family problem. So it's always important to help a family that is under stress to recognize that any problem the family is experiencing isn't an individual problem. It's the family's problem, which is why it disrupts the entire homeostasis of the family. There should be a solution-oriented approach rather than a blame-oriented approach to problem solving. So recognize, rather than saying it's your fault, if you had not done this, you always do this particular thing that causes the problem, is to say, rather than assuming blame, what's the problem? What do we need to do to solve the problem? So evolving from being from blame-oriented to solution-focused. There must also be a tolerance for other family members. You have to accept not only the person you're married to, but their extended family. Their family is your family. So there has to be a tolerance for other family members, extended family members. There must be a clear expression or clear expressions of commitment and affection for other family members. I remember this one comedian D.L. Hewley, who's a comedian that really isn't among my favorite comedians, but he was among the Hollywood stars that they were interviewing because he and his wife had been married for almost 20 years, if not longer. And they asked him what was the key to marital success. And he said, you have to be committed to your commitment. And I saw this on TV years ago. It's been well over 5 years ago that I heard him make the statement. But that is something that is truly, truly important. Whenever two people or persons within the family lose touch with the significance of their commitment to each other and to the family, there goes the disintegration of the family. So a clear expression of commitment to and affection for other family members. Commitment to the family. Committed to the commitment. There should also be open and clear communication among members. High family cohesion, so a sense of connectedness, an affinity for family members spending quality time with each other. So high family cohesion is extremely important. Families that enjoy spending time together are very healthy families. Oftentimes, when families come in for therapy, they have gotten to a place where the family cohesion has disintegrated, where the family members are kind of splintered out and doing their own thing without the family cohesion. We recognize that in order to rebuild a healthy family, you must have high family cohesion. You must have also role flexibility. It's not the wife's responsibility to always be the cook, the cleaner, the child care provider, but you also need the husband or, both parties within the relationship or the family unit to share in roles and responsibilities. You also need children to help and be flexible at times when family members, parents might be overwhelmed. But you never want this to be consistently the case, but there might be few exceptions where that might have to happen. But everybody contributing to the family, there's a flexibility in roles and responsibilities, and there's that mutual respect and appreciation for each other. There should also be the appropriate use of resources inside and outside the family. I've known families where the husband might have an addiction to strip clubs, or the wife might have a shopping addiction, or some kind of vice that exists outside of the family where a lot of the family's resources are being spent. So one of the coping strategies of an unhealthy family or a family that might be experiencing some level of dysfunctionality is ensuring that there is an appropriate use of resources, both inside as well as outside the family, exploring the extent to which resources are wasted, whether it be inside or outside the family. There should also be a lack of physical violence within the marriage or the relationship or within the family. And when I say a lack of physical violence, I also think, in addition to physical violence, emotional abuse can be just as profound. So not only physical violence or abuse should be avoided, but there should also be a lack of emotional or psychological abuse, as well as spending quality time as a family. There should be a lack of substance abuse as well in a family in order to preserve the homeostasis of a family. So those are among the coping strategies that exist that are very important to the family unit. So what does it take to become a family therapist? So if you're interested in being a family therapist and working with families, you must first understand the various developmental and systemic nuances of the family. How does a family develop? What are some of the problems that might arise in the family, and how do they impact the family? The second step is having the necessary knowledge about the dynamics of not only the individual, but also the family life cycle. So you have to understand how we develop as individuals and how we develop in the context of our family systems. And so through this class, we will share additional information about these two important steps to help you best understand what family therapy is and how to work effectively with families. Adler has had many contributions to family therapy, and we've talked about Adler earlier on as we discussed group therapy. And also, as we evolve into family therapy, we will continue to talk about Adler, because whether we're looking at issues related to groups or issues related to families, because Adler suggests that we are social beings and our problems are social in nature, it speaks to the significance of family, understanding families, and how the family structure might impact on an individual's well-being as well as the family system. So in keeping with that, we understand Adler's contributions to the group or social context as well as family therapy. So Alfred Adler was the first therapist to use and write about family therapy. And if you think back, I want you to always refer on some of the knowledge you've gained through other courses. For example, when you've had theories and techniques of counseling, both 1 and 2, you've learned about Alfred Adler. So he is the same Alfred Adler that we're talking about as it relates to family therapy. So Adlerian theory suggests that an individual cannot be understood in isolation, and that most of our problems that we have as individuals occur as a result of interpersonal problems. And so I believe that to be true. Very seldom does an individual have a problem where it's not social in nature, whether it be a substance abuse problem that the individual might have that then impacts his employment, impacts his marital relations, impacts the people in society because he or she may be drinking and driving and might cause an accident. But the fact of the matter, as Adler has communicated, problems are social in nature, and in order to resolve problems, you have to understand the social context or the social nature of problems. And oftentimes families are connected with problems that individuals might have. So what are the goals of family therapy? Well, to name a few, the goal of family therapy or goals are to change the system, not just the individual. So not only do you want to change the individual, but you want to change the system. You want to change dysfunctional patterns of relating to each other within the family context. And you want to also create more functional ways of interacting and communicating with each other. So whereby persons are always arguing or the wife is always nagging, one of the most important aspects of family therapy is to create functional ways of interacting within the family constellation that is different from the ways in which they have communicated previously. So one of the primary goals is to change dysfunctional patterns of relating. So what is the rationale for family therapy? Well, there is the belief that most life difficulties arise and can be best addressed within families. We also believe that family therapy is an effective treatment modality, and the outcome of family therapy is satisfaction among participants. So there is a better quality of life, people are more happy, their ways of communicating and relating are far more satisfying than they were previously. So when we look at the history of family therapy, what does it tell us? Because I truly believe the best way to understand a particular phenomenon is to understand the history relating to it, understand how it was established, the impetus behind it, and how things have evolved over time. So it was in the early 1940s to early 1950s where the formal development of family therapy occurred, that clinicians recognized that there is something unique and beneficial to family therapy, and hence it was developed as a treatment modality to impact not only the individual but the family constellation. We recognize that there is the American Association of Marriage Counselors, which was established in 1942, and also the key founders of family therapy is Alfred Adler, John Bell, Nathan Ackerman, Christian Middlefort, Theodore Litz, Layman Wayne, Murray Bowen, Carl Whitaker, and Virginia Satire. And as we evolve into our discussion about theoretical frameworks, we'll talk about these theorists, or many of these theorists, what they believed and what they espouse in their theoretical framework. The one thing you will notice as we talk about different theorists is that there is a lot of overlap in terms of what they believe. Sometimes there might be very, very slight nuances from one theorist to the next, but by and large, many of the therapeutic techniques and tools and treatment modalities that exist, irrespective of the theorist, are very, very similar in nature. So in the 1950s, clinicians considered family as the locus of psychopathology. So they recognized that in order to eradicate problems, understand problems, you have to understand and consider the family. Theorists as well as therapists during the 1950s believed that the family was the core problem or the core issue associated with psychopathology. And as a result, all approaches were influenced by general systems theory and cybernetics. And we'll talk a little bit more later on about what general systems theory is, as well as what cybernetics is. So general systems theory was described by Ludwig, and he believes that persons are best understood by studying their context. He also believes that the family is primarily an open system that is continuously receiving input from and discharging output into the environment. So there's a lot of actions and reactions that are constantly occurring. So it's almost like this machine that input output, things are occurring, individuals are responding, so stimuli are coming in and reactions are being discharged into the environment. He believes that the system is far more adaptable to change than some people believe. So general systems theory encourages and espouses change. Also, families strive to maintain homeostasis. And sometimes the way in which they strive to maintain homeostasis might be in dysfunctional ways, but nevertheless, as it relates to general systems theory, families are always striving to maintain homeostasis or balance, even when the homeostasis or balance might be arrived at in dysfunctional ways. So if you think of a family and you think of persons that might, like if there is an abusive spouse in the family or a spouse with a substance abuse problem, you will find in that family, despite that dysfunctional issue, families still try and cope and function and maintain a sense of balance and homeostasis despite what might be going on in the family. But when persons come to family therapy, you have to disrupt the homeostasis in an effort to bring about a more positive outcome. So we mentioned already that all approaches were influenced by general systems theory and cybernetics. So we've already unpacked briefly general systems theory. What I'd like for us to do now is briefly discuss exactly what cybernetics is, as per Gregory Bateson. And he says that cybernetics is a feedback loop through which a system receives information. And there are two primary types of feedback loop. There's a negative feedback loop and a positive feedback loop. With the negative feedback loop, it produces deviation and it helps a system maintain its status quo. So some people might refer to this system as garbage in, garbage out. You know, it's this negative loop. It produces deviation. So with the negative feedback loop, you're trying to disrupt the status quo. So you want to deviate produce a deviation and to help a system to maintain its status quo. With the positive feedback loop, it amplifies deviation or change and thereby disrupts the system. So the negative loop maintains the negative functioning. It maintains the status quo. And so it's consistent with what I said with the garbage in, garbage out. It's this negative way of functioning that the family continues to produce when communicating. It's almost like people that are in a rut and they continue to do the same dysfunctional things over and over, despite the fact they know it's not working. Unfortunately, persons aren't always sure of how to change that negative feedback loop. With the positive feedback loop, it amplifies the deviation. It amplifies or change whatever the problems are, the dysfunctional behaviors. And by amplifying the deviation or the change, it then disrupts the system. And it's through the disruption process that persons are able to develop more positive ways of functioning. So in therapy, the positive feedback promotes appropriate change in a dysfunctional family. So just to reemphasize, when you implement family therapy within the family, your role is to impact the positive feedback loop. And in impacting that positive feedback loop, you are amplifying the problem and bringing about change as a result of disrupting the system's functioning. We know that the positive feedback promotes appropriate change in a dysfunctional family system. So, in a nutshell, that wraps it up as it relates to understanding what families are, as well as the history of family therapy and some of the core premises behind family therapy and the provision of family therapy. So we will continue on with additional information by focusing more on Alfred Adler, who is pretty much the American pioneer as it relates to family therapy. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that you have found this portion of our lecture helpful.